Hi, and thanks for watching another instructional video for CSCI 1300. In this video, we're going to be doing an example with vectors and objects. We're going to be parsing some information from a text file, and I'm going to show you how to use common vector commands along with class commands in the same kind of program. So let's go over common vector commands, and then we're going to look at what we can do with vector commands and class commands in our menu when we're going to run this program. So some common vector commands involve operations on a vector. And the vectors are actually a lot like arrays, but they behave more closely to strings than arrays. So they have all of the different attributes of an array. You can store information, you can have data types associated with storage, and you can declare sizes, but that size is not static. So it can grow or it can shrink based on the programmer or the program's needs. So let's talk about a couple of those particular functions. All of these functions that we're looking at are related to the hashtag include vector at the top of your code. So let's talk about them. Some common ones that you might encounter. A pushback, which takes in some value in parentheses, will add an element to the size minus 1, the current size minus 1 of the vector. So vectors will grow and shrink, so this size isn't static, but we can add one at the end every time that we want to with a pushback. The .at function takes in an index and it will return whatever is stored at that index. So if we have a vector of objects, it will return an object at a particular index. If we have a vector of integers, it will return an integer at a particular index. It's a lot like a get function for a class. The vector.size is a lot like the string.length function. It will return an unsigned integer of the vector's current size. So this is really good for traversal. Another good function for traversal involves the .begin. So this will basically read the vector starting from an index of 0. So instead of setting a for loop to your iterative value being at 0, you could just set it at .begin without worrying about what the index is. And the other great thing about this is that you can use it for a couple of other functions for doing inserting or erasing at a particular index. So say we wanted to insert a value at a particular index. What either one of these do, either an insert or erase, it will keep the overall structure of the vector, because what we can do is we can add one and it will just insert it at that location and keep the rest of the elements the same. So we'll have one additional, the vector will grow by 1 and we'll have an additional index to access a new element. And the other thing is that the erase will do the same thing. It will shrink it by 1, take away that index, and keep the rest of the information stored in the same order. So the .insert will take in some, you can use the vector.begin plus some offsets. You need to determine how many indexes away from the beginning you need to add an element, and it will add an element before that particular index that you give. And then you'll have to, in the second part of this, it takes 2 arguments. The first portion here, that's one part of the argument. The second portion is the value that you want to store at that particular index. The .erase is similar, so you have to give it some location to start with plus some offset, and then it will remove an element at that index specified by the offset. Vector.empty returns true or false whether or not the vector is currently empty. So this will tell you whether or not there's something in the vector and is used for maybe checking to see if you've cleared a vector or if you can add to a vector at any given time. Vector.clear basically clears out the entire vector. So this removes all elements stored in the vector and makes the size 0. Vector.popback will remove one element, the last element that is currently at the index of current size minus 1. So a .clear is a lot like a industrial popback. Popback will only do one at a time. Clear will do all the pops all at once for the entire vector, no matter how big it is. So now that we've talked about common vector commands, let's talk about how to actually implement this in a menu. I'm not going to go into the details of what I do here with parsing because we've already seen that. I'm using a split function, I'm using file IO, I have some information to set everything into a parameterized constructor. I push that into the names array, so I say push back student. So I've got some object, I put it into the vector, it's there. And then I call a menu and I pass the vector there. So the vector of people, called names, gets passed into menu. And then we actually can operate on it. So let's talk about what we can do with that. We can print passing scores in the database, remove an entry, resize the database, or clear the database. So let's look at option 1. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check to see if the vector is empty. So this is a great way to check. You can just say like, okay, is there something that I can print? Yes, there is. Otherwise, there's nothing in the database. So if there is stuff to print, then we're going to print the past exam scores with the name and the score by looping through the vector using names.size, similar to a string. And we're going to call a class function here. So this is a get function from the class. And you can see that with the vector, you can use index brackets to access information just like an array. So this is where it actually works similar to an array of objects or a string. You can access it at a particular index location using brackets and call the class functions at that location. So here I'm checking for stuff and I'm printing stuff if it's true. To remove an entry in part 2, what I can do is I can set the size here and then say, okay, here's the entry at size -1, the name and the score. And then what I'm going to do is use the popback command to remove that individual entry at the end of the array. So that'll remove whomever is the last user stored that we parsed. If I want to resize the database, there's a couple of things to note here. So the first thing we'll need to do is we'll need to figure out what is the new size of the database. If it is larger than the current size, then we will add blank elements, blank locations with no elements. And if it is smaller than the current number of elements we have stored, say we have a size 10 vector, if we use resize to make it a size 5 vector, it will only keep the first 5 elements and discard the second 5 elements. So indexes 0 through 4 would have elements stored, and there would be nothing after that. The rest would be discarded. So you can see here that resize takes in that new size here. So we have to pass in the size here and then use it on the vector. In case 4, we're doing a clear operation. We're clearing the database. So in order to clear the database, what we want to do here is we want to use names.clear. So we're using the vector.clear, which clears the entire vector all in one step. We can check this by using the vector.empty command, which will tell us whether or not it was successful. Alternatively, like I was saying before, if you wanted to use a loop and say, like, as long as the size of the vector is not 0, we can just use a popback. This would basically do the same thing if you wanted to remove one element at a time, because the popback is basically an individual version of the .clear, which does everything related to popping elements off in bulk. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and run the program and give you an idea of what this looks like. So let's enter a grade threshold. Let's set it as 69. And let's print the passing scores in the database. So we can see here that the people who passed the exam got scores larger than 69, the lowest one being 73. Yes, 73. So we don't have any 69 scores, but we do have some scores in the 70s. So that is working correctly. We've made sure that we have that. So say we wanted to remove an entry. If we wanted to remove an entry, then we would be removing the last object stored, the last element stored. So in this case, it would be Felicia's score. So if we remove an entry, notice that we're removing, element being removed is Felicia 99. If we print this information again for who passed the exam, notice that Felicia is up here on the original option 1, and now Felicia is gone. So we have removed the last object from our vector. If we wanted to resize the vector, let's say we wanted to resize the vectors to a size, what was the original size? I think the original size was 20. How many scores do we have? I think we had 20. So I'm going to say 10. So let's print the scores now. Notice that we have significantly less people who have passed the exam here. And say we wanted to clear the database, we can press 4. All entries in the database have been removed. So if we try to press option 1 again, notice that we're now getting nothing in the database because we're checking to see if there are people there now, but we have removed everyone. So now the vector is at size 0 and we have cleared the vector completely. So that's how to use vectors with objects. Thanks for watching and happy coding.